Welcome everyone to this month's webinar. The topic this month is looking at survey optimization, how to make the best out of your survey, how to reduce sort of times, costs, and your implementation of your survey into field. We're going to be running through a few sort of areas and discussions on here as well for about 45 minutes. There'll be a sort of Q&A area here, so any comments you put into the YouTube sort of video comments on there whilst we're going along, I'll try and answer some of those at the end of it, or any comments for those that are watching through Hangouts can plug straight into that. The webinar will be available on our YouTube channel, along with all previous webinars in there for you to review and look at, and keep your eyes out for any of the upcoming emails that invite you to them. So what we're going to be looking at is, how do we actually optimize a survey? What's the type of things we can do? What are the indicators there that can make our survey work in the most efficient fashion possible, be most effective with our survey implementation on there. Now, with the sort of the ethos that Nebu has of the collect, manage, utilize story that we're given, and the products we're looking at mostly sort of today, and some of the examples will be shown of the indicators that are available will be based on information available in Dub Interviewer, some of the capabilities you can do through sort of the data hub, merging different data samples and sources in there, and some of the additional visualization that Data Hub offers, and the dashboarding, instant access and review you can see in Nebu Reporter. We'll be looking at how you can get that information out, what information is available to you, and what that can indicate in your workflow processes in there. Now, when we're looking at your sort of workflow and your processes, one of the sort of the most crucial things obviously is right at the very first is to test. Can't stress it enough. It's one of those things that we know that there's always a rush to get into field, get the work done. Nowadays the way that the information flow is, the way that everyone is online continuously, that it's expected that everything is quick, instant, and done dynamically. But testing things just really will save a lot of time in your outcome. Using things such as sort of a Dub tester to run sort of data through it, dummy data, and collect that. Using the tools for going online and testing the survey flow, making sure that goes through properly. Going through all the different options and making sure your routing's correct as well. Checking for compatibility on different devices, even just changing the browser size to check the layout and things like that can help on there. You need to look at sort of how that sample's pulled in, if it's conducting the right information, and then routing off that. And that sample sort of also works with pulling that into the invitations, making sure that the sample's read into the invites, making sure the invites look okay. There's, as I said, there's tools in Nebu, but there's a lot of tools outside of that you might want to look at. There's plenty of things online for checking your sort of screenshots in different browsers on different devices. If you think the combination of the amount of different devices, different operating systems, different browsers that can be used, it's almost unlimited. And to try and replicate that within your own testing capabilities, it's going to take sort of an inordinate amount of time, and that sort of time balance, cost balance is something key to making your survey work correctly. But there are some great tools out there. As I said, there are sort of tools from different companies, 2x4 to name one, that will sort of show you all the routing combinations and coordinations there as well. But given that you've done your testing and you sort of launch a soft launch, get your survey out into field, what you'll then be looking for is quickly identifying any of the errors that are in the scripting, whether it be the scripting errors, layout errors and issues, routing ones in there as well. All of those can have an impact on your fieldwork. Having to stop fieldwork to address these and then restart it, possibly wasting some of that data that's come in. That's not really going to sort of optimize your field work, make your costing as tight as it could be. Reducing the overruns, just making sure that your invites actually target the right people, that you are sort of using the most appropriate mode of data collection for the respondent. Make sure that you do everything possible to ensure the optimization of it, and that might be looking at taking an omni-channel approach, as we've previously discussed in different webinars on there, looking at sort of using that agile methodology to try and ensure that you do things in the most accurate way, the quickest and responsive way as well. You want to ensure also that you have a high level of accuracy of the data. The better the data is, the less additional surveys and field work you have to conduct, the less sort of redoing of surveying there is there, and the better your reporting and information will be. The sort of the aim really is to optimize the amount of completes you're going to get, so that every single contact, or as many contacts as possible, result in a complete survey, result in data that is usable, is exact to your requirements and meets those requirements, and will give you that ability to be able to properly report the survey findings that you're looking for. Now, all of that, though, does come with having to have that sort of compliance on there as well, making sure that you are still doing things in the correct fashion, making sure that the data and the way you collect that is compliant with the requirements and the regulations in all the different countries. It's again, if you can do all of these things and you have an almost perfect survey, but then you realize that you can't use that data because you haven't been compliant, you've just wasted all that time and scrapping information and costs and time that is associated with that is never going to be a good thing to do. So I think one of the important things to sort of realize here is that it's that not really what you do on there in your surveying, what type of survey work you do it, but it's how you do it, how you conduct that survey, how you run yourselves through all those different areas. So doing things right as early as possible can optimize your data, your flow, can make sure that you've got that sort of data in there and the efficiency of your field work. But once you've gone into field, you've done all your testing, you're happy with it, you want to launch it out, how can you easily identify what sort of indicators are available to you to be able to spot any possible areas that would need further investigation? Now, we're going to sort of look at a lot of different areas on here in quite some detail and look at what those implications can be. The types of things we're going to be looking at is, the sort of the last question indicator. What was the last question that was filled out in the survey? We'll look at the length of interview, looking at how long different surveys have taken. And that just might not be in sort of a survey itself, but across different modes in that survey based on the different invites, the different sort of types of people that are taking that survey. We'll look at the sort of location, how that can be used as an indicator, depending on the type of surveying work you're doing, the type of mode you're interviewing in, how that can assist you. And looking at how information on the browser or the device that's being used can assist in finding potential errors, potential issues, can flag up certain considerations that you might want to take. And of course, one of the sort of the oldest ones in the research world on there is looking at the whole count or an error count, making sure you have consistency across that data that's being collected in. Quick indicators that'll show you potentially where some issues may be. Now, each indicator on its own can lead you into certain sort of ways, and we'll see what those can be, what types of areas you might want to investigate on all of these as they come up. So looking at the last question, and just a sort of a quick screenshot of some data we've captured on here, pushed in. So a particular survey on here, we've got a lot of different areas where people are stopping. This was sort of a test survey that we conducted ourselves. So we've got sort of 80 people stopping completely on the start form. Now, if this was the sort of the area that you're looking at in a single sort of survey that you've got yourself, that might be an area of concern. You're looking at sort of certain questions there that everyone's dropping out on the first one. But so knowing the structure, knowing what all the different questions are, is important to sort of filter out those legitimate reasons for having ends there. It might be sort of based on a screen and that, but why do things happen on the last question? And the last question we have to remember is not the sort of the final screen that a respondent sees that says you did not qualify or you screened out. It's the last question they actually completed. So if they have to say yes at question 1 to go through, and they say no, and then get the sorry, you're not eligible for this survey, question 1 will still be that last question they had. So it's important, as we said, to know your survey, know how that works through. But what can sort of different last questions indicate? Well, it can show where the survey's broken. If you're getting sort of last questions that aren't screen out questions that people hit and then leave, and there's no real explanation for it, it's not a routing question that would lead them out of the survey, then perhaps there's something broken in the survey there. So looking at those figures can give you that indication. If you get too many of those screener type questions going out, are your quotas too tight? Are you sort of rooting people out because of the way that quota has been set up? Or perhaps the quota itself has been set up incorrectly. Having cross quotas that cancel each other out. Perhaps one sort of closes after only 5 surveys, but it's blocking a much larger survey sort of quota on there as well. And looking at how your quotas are defined within your survey. Seeing too many people go out than you'd expect certain questions can help lead to that as well. If you're looking at sort of the browser or the device on there, it might indicate that if a lot of people are going out on a certain question, and it contains perhaps a web question on there as well, scripting in that particular survey, or it's a very large grid, and you've sort of not sort of made that compatible with different devices. A mobile phone can't see that large grid. Then perhaps that dropout on that question is because it's too difficult to complete that question for the respondent. It's not encouraging them to conduct that survey and to complete that survey. And it could also show that there's an issue with that particular question. Not just sort of the way that it's being looped to or routed to, or the setup of it, but even the way it's being asked. Perhaps it's asking in a manner which puts people off. Sort of that. Perhaps a financial question where you want to know exactly what their weekly income is, rather than in bands, and how you sort of present the question to them, how you ask that question. Bearing in mind we try not to be leading and influence bias on the survey as well, but just being conscious of how that question is being asked, and perhaps wording it differently to encourage people to respond. So those are all things that can come up from looking at just the last question indicator. If we look at length of interview on there, and what we can see, just looking at the sort of different durations, different blocks on there as well, you might see there's a block of very short interviews, and we can do this across not just completes, but the everyone that's entered the survey. So you'd expect to see a number of different dropouts at a very short period of time. Those get kicked out from the screeners on there as well. If you're looking at just completes, you'd expect them to be sort of bunched around the middle area on there. But if you look at those different sort of interview durations on there, it'll give you different indicators of what exactly has happened with your lengths of interview. So too many sort of short ones can indicate there's speeders or fraudsters that have come into the system. People that aren't really reading the survey and jump through. So if you've got a lot of very, very quick completes, you might want to investigate those, look at that and see whether there's any straight lining in it, how people have gone through those different questions, perhaps have different indicators on the length of individual questions, those ones that are probing for more information to see whether they genuinely could have read that question or not. If you're looking at, again, in the length of interview, is there any browser or device issues? Are some things not playing? Perhaps they're not being able to review a video, so they're just skipping next on there. They're not seeing the stimuli, so they're writing minimal sort of responses in those. So again, there can be issues that come up indicated by the length of interview, and seeing whether that's something to do with how that survey is being presented in there as well. But if you're looking at the different modes as well, you may see there's different efficiencies in those different modes based on that. So, for example, if you're sending a survey that is a multi-mode survey, you might want to look at the time taken for completion, comparing your CATI interviewers to your sort of web surveys, and really make sure that you are being efficient and optimal in your sort of field work and how you conduct that. Everyone assumes that the web interviewing is always much quicker, much more efficient than telephone interviewing, but that might not hold true for every type of respondent. Some people are, maybe it's harder to get certain types of people, certain demographics to complete online. Perhaps they're more comfortable with just discussing things and finding that time because there's someone on the phone. They may spend those 10 minutes doing that rather than keep coming in and out of a survey that's online and getting that reminder and how many times you process it. So mode efficiency and looking at that as sort of how to optimize your surveys. And again, it's something we've talked about in our sort of omni-channel webinars and looking at different modes and how you conduct and optimize your survey. We've discussed beforehand. So it's something just to be sort of bearing in mind as an indicator from your length of interview. The other thing can be then sort of, web bots. Have someone used those sort of automated survey completions? Are there engines out there that are doing that for you? And they will be a lot quicker than a human interpreting and conducting those as well. Kind of crosses over into the speedsters, fraudsters area as well, but less of a human completion of those surveys, more than a sort of an automated robotic fashion on there as well. And all of those can be sort of a cost indicator for your length of interview. A lot of the survey costing will be based on how long that survey is, how long it's going to take to do that field work and sort of pull in that information. So being able to really look at where your outliers are, where the average is for your survey, and making sure that you have costed accurately, that length of interview can help on that. And that also leads for a more efficient survey, a more efficient set of field work. Now, if we look at the sort of the location of the respondent, and again, a map that's been drawn up here based on sort of survey responses, and having just the sort of the detail in the map, being able to zoom in and out of it, being able to look at what has gone on, can help to assist with, again, depending on different modes, where respondents have come from. So, location is quite a useful indicator. And being able to do that sort of IP capture, which is automatically done in Nebu's sort of data collection software. The same with the GPS capture, which can be put into the CAPI app, pulling down, where those CAPI interviews have taken place. This can help then by sort of showing you, indicating any fraud by your agents or the respondents. If your survey is about a local, supplier, and you have respondents, say a local supplier based in Europe, and you have respondents that are answering your survey in sort of China and Australia, it's unlikely that they should be there. Just seeing where that IPs come in, you can start looking and seeing where people are trying to get around the system, maybe answering when they shouldn't have. So perhaps you have to consider having IP blocks or checks within the survey itself, making sure that again your survey is optimized and flowing efficiently. But with your agents in the field, making sure that the GPS is captured there, so you know where those surveys are being conducted. So you've got that right spread across your CAPI interviewing, or if they're doing sort of exit surveys, then you know that those were conducted in the right place. If you're doing an exit survey at a cinema, you won't expect the GPS location to be in your agent's home or around his friend's house. So just having that extra information to make sure that you know how your survey is being conducted and being conducted in or by the right set of people in the right areas can really help on that. And it also means that you're looking at how correct your data is, knowing that you can rely on that data that's been collected by your agents or provided by your respondent is from the right place. It is correct. It can be used on that. So it means, again, you're not throwing away information as it comes down to you. Now, looking at sort of browsers, and again, the Nebu system, the Dub Interviewer will collect all this information for you. We'll sort of gather which browser and device is being used on there as well, and that can also help sort of with your sort of survey indicators on there. We'd expect, given the sort of the amount of different devices available out there as well, and how different devices work, you expect sort of Chrome, Firefox, IE, Safari, those type of things to come up in different levels. So you'd expect to see a spread of those browsers coming up. But there may be other browsers that come up which are sort of more or less unknown on there as well. And when you're looking at the browser there or the device there, then if you see certain sort of browsers being very, very small, then that may indicate issues as well. You could be looking at sort of scripting issues. As you said, this can also look in your sort of error counts, and they cross over, but scripting issues in there so that a certain browser cannot display properly. It's not sort of responsive on there as well, so your survey is not being displayed on different screens. And again, the browser devices in there should show these sort of automated bots that are coming up, should show whether certain browsers are being used on that. You tend to find programming of these bots happens for different browsers in there, and you'll see if certain ones come up, which you wouldn't expect, a higher level usage of those. But one of the things about sort of browsers as well and device looking at that is it can help feedback how your respondents are sort of answering their surveys. So how you have to think about inviting them, how you think about pulling them into that survey in the first instance as well. So you might want to change the method of invitation based on the different browsers you're seeing, the different devices that are being used. And if you are looking at devices on there, and it's, again, say an exit survey from a cinema, you'd expect that to be filled in on a mobile device, being identified as a cell phone or you wouldn't expect it to be a desktop. So, if you see sort of desktop coming up and it's an exit survey from a sort of cinema location, no one really lugs around a massive tower PC with them when they go and watch a film. So it's just something that will show you, where there could be potential issues within your survey. And coming back to the traditional sort of hole counts or error counts, and we're just displaying a number of errors on here as well. It might be one of those sort of really old-fashioned things on there to have a hole count, but they are really useful in being able to check that consistency. all your totals should be aligned in there, and it should be counting the skips and the no answers, and making sure that you've got a consistency of responses and counts throughout your survey. And if you haven't, then there should be scripting errors. If you see that question 1 has 200 in total, and some of those are skipped and some of those are non-answered, and some of those are different answers on there as well, but and the next question only has sort of 170, and that is all your skips and answers, then you've got an issue. How do people not answer that question and not have it flagged as being not answered or skipped? There must be something in the handling of the survey. Perhaps it's a version change, and so that question's been completely disappeared from the next one. But being able to see those and handle that information is key in there, and looking at error counts and that also goes in for sort of incorrect routing. You can see that if you've got 100% of answers are skipped on a particular question in a whole count, then there's obviously a routing issue there. It's going to stand out at you. So whilst it is a sort of people like to think of it as a sort of an old and one of the very first sort of types of indicators there, that whole count is sort of undervalued in some ways and underutilized. And again, sort of having error counts on there, that can show up any of those connection issues, which may be look related to your browser and your device. So as it comes down, we've seen that whilst you're looking at sort of several different indicators over there, and they show you a small aspect of it, or they show you several different possibilities of what could be needed to be investigated further, it's never quite enough just to look at one indicator in isolation. So, if you want to look at sort of different indicators, and then, perhaps using Nebu's data hub to do that, or pivot tables in the Nebu reporter, or looking at some of the extra information in Dub Interview on there, you can start looking at things in more detail. So as an example on the screen here, we're looking at, a different device that's come up there, the device that was used by the respondent, and crossing that by the different questions. So then, we can see things on the sort of chart here. So, we've got a desktop, and here we see, there's 16 people that have gone out. Their last question was the choice question on there. Now we know this survey is picking, something to look at on that one. So we've got a high level on there that may indicate that there's something wrong with the desktop. Our re-ask question as well, there's a high level there. But this, I know on this survey, this is one of those end ones where they don't necessarily have to click to the, no, I don't want to see any other examples. And so it's a legitimate area of going out. But as I said, it's being able to look at the figures, being able to see where things are issues. And, for me, Q2, this mobile phone one, a lot of people, there's a higher number here on the mobile phone leaving at Q2. Now, that's something I wouldn't expect. So this gives me an indicator that I can start looking at that particular question on a mobile device. Perhaps I fire it up on my mobile and I see what's happening on there. I start looking at, that information. So by looking at the device by the last question, by doing those different cross tabs, different ratings on there, it gives me the ability to check for errors in a survey at a specific question on a specific device. So I can see whether there's, I can try and mirror the actions of my interviewer, of my respondent, and see whether that's a specific that's come up. And that's something that, whilst you can try and do in your testing phase, as we said, the amount of different combinations of operating system, device, browser, and question types and routing, being able to have this information to hand as fieldwork's flowing helps you in identifying those. You can also see whether there's a difficulty in answering that survey. Are there particular questions that provide challenges to the respondent? not just because of the error, but because it's perhaps the way it's presented on different screens on there. Perhaps the layout on a device is proving difficulty on there. And again, using a couple of indicators, it's not going to provide you an instant answer, but it's going to help then narrow down where you should be looking, what those possibilities are in having the errors. If we look at a sort of question by question, and we've just randomly selected different questions to cross them here as well, you might then start seeing where these sort of outliers are. So, seeing things like here, we've got an outlier on a couple of areas here, whereas, most of them are in this range, this straight line. So then I might want to start looking at these different sort of responses to the different questions, why they crossed. Should they be asked at the same time? It's starting to then give me extra information about the way responses are feeding my survey flow, and should they be there? If this is a question that should have that correlation, and that's probably why I've run a question by question analysis on it, then the outliers may be of interest to me. They may start indicating different areas that I need to do additional investigation on. So when we're looking at that sort of question by question cross tab on there as well, it's going to sort of quickly show those outliers, those unexpected results, those areas that maybe we want to look at why those occurs. Are they genuinely outliers? And not everyone is uniform. Or is it just because of the way we've handled that survey, the way we're routing people? Is there something incorrect in there as well, even though it may look through testing to be a logical path through there? It can also indicate, again, that sort of those web bots, those automated respondents, they don't have that consistency of human logic in there to say, well, these two types of responses meet together. They're just randomly picking responses. So it could indicate that on there, or it could indicate sort of fraud by the respondent. The respondent is one of those sort of speedsters, fraudsters that are going through and just trying to get to the end of the survey without really reading it. So you're seeing that they are outside of that normal line of expectation, that they deviate from that norm. So it can help identify those, and also help identify that perhaps there's some scripting issues there. Perhaps you've sort of looked at the different sort of surveys that's coming. The routing's gone through wrongly. That question shouldn't be presented to certain types of responses. So it's perhaps you've not done an elimination on your scripting in there. So a choice should have been removed because it's not expected based on previous responses. And that's something just not always easy to pick up when you're doing that routing through, because when you do your sort of normal check, you're checking for the logic, you're checking that a question is displayed, but not always necessarily thinking about the multiple different combinations of answers and why a certain response should come up. So again, being able to sort of quickly monitor what's going on and monitoring it in real time, getting those indicators all together is useful. So what we're going to have a quick look at is on this sort of a Nebu dashboard, is how we can sort of actually get onto these indicators and find out what we're going on. So so if we just jump into the survey. As we're launching up, we'll see that we've got different browsers on there as well. We can see that we can jump into a Nebu survey on there as well. And just having a look at a sort of dashboard report, and we're jumping in here. We can see on this one, we've got different sort of surveys coming up. It'll give me my results, my charts on there as well. I can see my length of interview, so I can see where my interviews are happening on there as well. see if there's any differences in the minimum and the maximums on there. So, having very long surveys that are way above the average, that may be, an indicator that I need to take a look at something there. I've got my different last questions, so I can see those different core results. I can run through some different tabs, sort of run questions by questions, see where theirs are, and perhaps I might want to do that as a highlighter. Or I've got, again, different questions in bar charts so I can see them. I can pull in my information very quickly and easily. So I'm looking at the different devices that are used, different browsers that are used, seeing whether I've got my sort of expectations on how things are there. So, a large chunk by Chrome, Safari browsers, IE, that makes sense. A couple of Samsung ones in there. So, it will show me that this is, usually a mobile survey on. So I can see that different browsers are being filled in there. Looking at my different sort of counts on here, so where people stop answering the survey, so I've got that as an indicator. I've got my duration here as well, so my interview duration, and perhaps, these sort of outliers at the end. This all looks fine. It's got a curve that I'm expecting to see. A lot of people around the middle of it. Perhaps some people taking longer because they're working through the survey, or they have more skip logic in there, and some very quick ones, which I may want to investigate these quick ones and see why they were so quick. And then looking in my IP, I can start zooming around here, and I might have some concerns over some of the responses that are from sort of countries where I wouldn't expect. This is a European, UK focused survey. So there's different information I can see, and having that dashboard to hand, being able to see all of that information in quick scrolls and see it updated in real time, means that I've got that information to hand. I can start evaluating, start investigating in my complete survey. Look at those invites, look at how they're coming through, making sure that my samples are all working through, and getting the information available to me. Being able to see what's happening in real time provides me the information to be more agile in my approach to optimizing my survey, to collecting my field work. So we've got all the different sort of graphs and charts available here as well. So as we can see, the use of different elements can indicate different sort of areas for concern in there. So, not only will the browser type, the questionnaire design, any sort of length of interviews, broken devices, the last question by device, these can all sort of help identify survey errors. We can look at the sort of different durations, the geolocations, look at the devices being used to see whether this is going to increase our productivity, help improving our productivity, help improving our agents, CAPI agents or CATI agents. Look at how that's responding. Looking at the sort of addresses, as we said, can help make sure that you've got that compliance in your field work, that there's sort of no fraud happening on there as well. And looking at your sort of the way attributes are going out, the distribution of them, if those sort of outliers can flag up whether that data is correct or not, and having different sort of data sources coming in, seeing where those work all together. So in effect, what you happen is you sort of get this sort of massive honeycomb information that's all feeding in all these different elements and indicators to assist you in finding out how to optimize your survey, how to look at your fieldwork, how to make sure you're being the most efficient you can be in collecting your data, getting your information out. And as we previously saw in a few of the sort of webinars we've looked at on different things there, by going through that sort of process automation, by sort of removing those manual elements so that you can automate those routine works, you reduce the errors there. You increase your quality control by looking at, having those instant insights, identifying those errors and irregularities, making sure you've got sort of that sort of correctness of data going through your system, increasing your efficiency. So by saving times and resources, by minimizing the amount of extra work you have to do, and removing that manual work, you're sort of increase your efficiency, and all of those things together, that automation, quality control, increased efficiency, is going to lead you to that full survey optimization you're looking for. Leads you to making the sort of the most effective use of the tools you have to hand, the indicators you have to hand, to ensure that your fieldwork is conducted in the best possible fashion. And that will lead you to that pure survey optimization, the sort of the end goal of what we're really trying to achieve here. So that was our webinar for today. If there are any sort of questions, we'll just run through those now as well. I've just put a couple of sort of links up there for your information as well. Our YouTube channel, where you can find all the different webinars. If you have any questions that haven't come up, info@nebu.com, fine to help us on there as well. But yep, let me just quickly look at some of the comments on there. Right, yeah, we have one here. Okay, there's a question about, yeah, okay, how do I, someone's asking about sort of the some of the displays we showed on the cross table on there as well. Yeah, I showed the ones in the Nebu reporter, which allows you to do sort of cross tabs on there and select whether it's based on completes or not, select which quota group that's in. You can also do that in Dub Interviewer, and because of the way sort of Nebu Data Hub works and being able to channel all of those together, that can help. But yeah, it is important to be able to have that flexibility in drilling down in a cross tab and not just running sort of one question by one question without being able to apply those filters. You may have, and it will all come down to how you have scripted your survey, how you know that survey detail information, to know which questions can be crossed, whether those questions apply to certain quota groups or not. But it's just sort of there isn't going to be a common standard that you can run as a pivot table to be able to identify a survey as any irregularities. There may be some typical ones you'd be looking at is the sort of that age by sort of age breakdown in there. And perhaps by if it's a certain brand, then that might be a nice indicator in there, or knowing that you shouldn't have people of a certain age in your survey and they should be rooted out, so they shouldn't be showing up in your complete. So there are going to be some sort of common indicators across your surveys, but generally it's going to be down to your knowledge of your particular survey that's going to help in that, help to understand where those errors are, where those elements are. Yeah, another good, someone asking if these are the only indicators. Well, no. What we've tried to do is really give a sort of a flavor of some of the most common indicators that come up that can show where you may want to sort of have your investigations into the running of your fieldwork. And it's not expected that that you're going to be running every single sort of possible test. Because you've got to make that balance always between having the information to hand, information you gather, and how quickly you can respond to that and make those changes. If you're doing a 3 or 4 question exit poll based on one event that you only have sort of one day to collect that information, then you're not going to be spending half of that day looking at 30, 40 different indicators and investigating time into that survey. There's a balance between how much data you can take in, how much is acceptable, how much you sort of remove after the field work, and the length of time you have on that field work. So it's not meant to be a prescriptive way of going through every single check to make sure that you are as correct as possible. What we do sort of recommend is that testing, a lot of testing is done up front. A lot of tools are used to do that testing. So when you go into field, a lot of these indicators shouldn't show at all. But as we said, no matter how much testing you're going to do, the sort of breadth and depth of possibilities in respondents now is so wide, so much wider than it always used to be, that you can't cater for all options on there. So just being aware of what indicators there, how that can help, and balancing that trade-off between spending huge amounts of time on the testing on a survey that's only going to be in field for a short amount of time. You've got to balance that off yourself and make sure that you optimize your time as well, not just in making your survey optimal, but in being as efficient as you can and utilizing the time you have in the best and most appropriate fashion. So it all comes back to sort of that agile mindset, being able to be flexible, being able to move quickly, being able to react to those indicators as and when they are required and as they come up. Well, it just remains me to thank everyone for viewing the webinar today. As I said, it will be available on our YouTube channel, and we'll be sort of sending out post information on that to let everyone know. You can share all of these the webinar and other webinars with anyone that wasn't attending today, and look forward to inviting you and seeing you all at the next webinar. So, thank you.